Welcome, listeners, to the Wild Wild West End, a podcast about Galveston County naturalism and wildlife. This is episode 6, The Lizards of Galveston County. So, historically, there are 7 native lizards to Galveston County. I'm covering 9 lizards total in this episode, 3 of which are going to be introduced species, one of which is extirpated from Galveston County. The 10th is the prairie skink, which is reported to be in the county by Herps of Texas, but as of this point, I have seen no actual evidence of that. I do believe it. I've inquired about museum specimens, and I'll run a short update episode if that produces anything. But I have never seen that animal or photographed it, and I don't know anyone who has seen or photographed that animal for sure inside Galveston County. So, from my earliest memories of childhood in Galveston County, I can remember catching green anoles, little brown skinks, even, starting in the mid 80s, the Mediterranean house geckos started to show up in Galveston County, possibly earlier than that. The mid 80s would probably be the earliest time when I was allowed to run around my yard unaccompanied at night. So that would have been when I caught my first Mediterranean house geckos. But I do remember my father bringing one home from Marathon Oil, where he worked sometime in the early to mid 80s, and showing it to me and telling me that he did not know what it was, that he had caught it at work. I kept that lizard for a while, actually, fed it insects. It lived, I don't know, possibly 3 or 4 years more in captivity before it passed away, presumably, from old age. I'm not sure, back then I wasn't going to take the animal in for a necropsy, but so anyway, to my original point, I grew up in Galveston County catching the native lizards of the area. There were several of the lizards that I did not actually catch in the county until much later in life, in the last few years. So there are things lurking in your backyard, in your immediate area, that you have no idea about sometimes. And that was the case for me. I've caught several of those lizards later in life, as I said. So we're going to cover, most of the lizards that can be found in Galveston County, with the exception of the prairie skink. We're not going to talk about the prairie skink because like I said, I have nothing to present. I haven't got any photos. I don't know anyone that has any photos. I've actually sent out a request to Toby Hibbets of Tamug to see if he has a museum specimen or a photo that I can use, and he has yet to respond. So, once again, this is the episode 6, The Lizards of Galveston County. So, the first species that we are going to talk about today is the green anole, Anolis carolinensis, which is also sometimes referred to as the American chameleon because of its ability to change colors from bright green all the way to really dark brown, almost black in some cases. So this is an adult male. These lizards are arboreal. You're usually going to find them climbing on homes, on fences, on decorative shrubs and things, and flower beds in an urban environment, which they have done very well in, by the way. Number 1 lizard caught in my yard as a child. Still to this day one of the most populous lizards in the county, but facing some competition from one of the invasives that we'll talk about in a while here that's actually closely related to them. So these are insectivores, eating moths, other small insects, occasionally small spiders. As you can see there, it has a gular pouch that's red, kind of hanging down that loose skin below the throat there. You can actually inflate that as part of its courtship display and its a ritual combat display with other males. This specimen here is actually an adult female, which is going to be not significantly smaller as an adult, but a little smaller. You're going to notice some sexual dimorphism between the male and female in both size and appearance. The male is typically going to lack that stripe down the back with the horizontal markings across it. It's almost like a ladder stripe. Like I said, the females are going to be a little bit smaller. They are going to lay a couple of eggs, several times a year. These lizards are, I mentioned before that they're arboreal. You're going to find them up on trees and things. It seems that the more invasive brown anoles that arrive in the county, the further up into the trees they seem to be forced, according to some sources, and that's according to my own observation. This is another adult male specimen. This one is displaying its brown coloration. Now these lizards will not only change color to match their background, they will also change color as an indicator of stress. Those black spots behind the eye there are, usually when the animal's riled up or stressed out, they will display these markings. This animal was both on a brown surface and disturbed by my presence. This was very early in the morning. I woke this animal up and took this photo. As you can see, there's dew collected on it from sleeping overnight in this position. So once again, very common lizard in the county. At one time, it was probably the most common lizard in the county, at least that was commonly seen. Have really fond memories of keeping, my father built me a small screen cage when I was young and allowed me to keep these as pets. And, I went out every day and caught crickets and other insects to feed them. And I misted their cage, the screen of their cage walls, so they could, drink the droplets of water off the side. And I had some of them for a number of years, and they made great pets. So I encourage you, if you have children that are into to reptiles and amphibians, this is a great starter animal to, kind of break that ice and get them into keeping these. You can actually buy them at almost any big name pet store for a fairly cheap price. I actually recommend that over catching one in the wild and bringing it into captivity. But that on a limited basis, that's really okay too, in my opinion, if it helps to educate a child or an adult. This is the brown anole, also sometimes referred to as the Cuban anole or the Bahamian anole. These are a highly invasive lizard. They arrived here, as best we can tell, sometime in the 1970s, both via shipping containers and the pet trade. They have since, ground zero for these guys was Florida. You can now find them all the way across the South. There's some significant gaps in where you find them, but you can find them with some consistency all the way from Florida to California and also in Hawaii across the South. So they have really impacted our ecosystem, relegating the green anole to further up in foliage and into treetops. They are documented to eat the young of other native lizards, including the green anole. It's unfortunate. They're quite a beautiful lizard. Very little is being done to control their populations. There was here where I'm at in Galveston Island, so you can find these guys all over Galveston Island now. There was kind of a gap in the population starting at about 8 Mile Road and ending west of Eckert Bayou, but I have now found a single specimen smack dab in the middle of that gap, meaning that they are probably fairly widespread across that area and just hard to find. These are also arboreal lizards, but I have observed them personally to be much more terrestrial. They will cross large areas of ground. They are extremely fast runners. Your best hope at catching one is to go out on a cool day and catch them sunning when they're not as alert and fast. A good place to observe these lizards is Tom Thumb's nursery here on Galveston Island, where they're all over the flower beds, and Moody Gardens is probably being the best place. They are just out sunning on the concrete edges of flower beds there every day. Also, Lafitte's Cove is fairly overrun with them. My friend Jim's patch of woods in Indian Beach, way away from any of these other places, also has brown anoles. Anolis segrii So they are a very successful invasive species. Insectivores, like most of the other lizards we're going to talk about today, there's really only one that's not a strict insectivore, and it even mostly is. So these are, of a size with green anoles, not a very large lizard. Um, Kind of the same with the females are going to be slightly smaller than the males, and they're going to lack that dewlap you see there that is very brightly colored. They are quite a beautiful lizard. I saw my first ones in Galveston County, probably in the early 2000s, on a friend of mine's street, kind of over by Moses Lake in Texas City. Quickly after that, I saw them also by Leo's, a burger stand over in Lamarck, and from there, I have now found them everywhere. They, some large urban areas with big concrete buildings and schools, subdivisions are just completely overrun with them to the point that you can rarely actually find a green anole there anymore. It's mostly just these. Now, I'm not sure if that's because the green anoles are just higher up in the trees and I'm not seeing them, or if they've been completely driven out. So this is, these guys are a problem. Very little is being done about it. I'm not sure what can be done about it. The infestation is at such a level. So I actually catch these guys and euthanize them, freeze them for a good period of time, and then I will feed them to some of my snakes that I own because I'm a herpetoculturist. My coluber type snakes, the racers, love them. The Masticophus species snakes, the coach whips also will readily consume them because they are lizard-eating snakes, and these things smell enough like our native anoles that they are a good prey item. So, it's unfortunate that such a beautiful animal is so invasive and so widespread, but at this point it is what it is. We have these guys here, and I'm just here to teach you a little bit about them, and mainly to teach you that they are not a native species. This is a female brown anole that was photographed at Lafitte's Cove. That previous animal, the male, was also photographed at Lafitte's Cove. As you can see, it's a little bit thinner, smaller than the male, and that's really all there is to say about that. This next animal is the keeled gecko, Cyrtopodion scabrum. This animal is only found, as far as I know, at a couple of very limited sites on Galveston Island and not anywhere on the mainland. Probably not coincidentally, these couple of sites are very near the port of Galveston, where I suspect these guys came in on shipping containers. They look very similar to our more common Mediterranean house gecko. The really noticeable difference is going to be that these guys have kind of a twin row of spots, or neat rows of spots down their back, is where the Mediterranean is going to be a little more scattershot on the spotting. Also the toe pads. Really, if you get one of these guys in hand and look at their feet, these guys are really going to have minimal toe pads in comparison to the more common Mediterranean house gecko. So these are an Asia endemic. They, like I said, got here through shipping containers, not the pet trade. These guys are not going to be a commonly kept pet. They actually go by many names. The common tuberculate ground gecko, the rough-tailed bowfoot gecko, the rough-tailed gecko, the rough bent-toed gecko. So, the keeled gecko seems the easiest name to stick with for me. So that's the common name I go by, and the common name that I think most of the scientific community uses. So, back to where you can find these guys. If you're an enthusiast that wants to go see them, the building on Harborside Drive near the Port of Galveston that used to be the Farmer's Copper building, which I think is now used as a parking garage for a cruise line, the alley behind this building, at night, these are nocturnal lizards. You'll want to go out there at night, and you can find them running around in pretty good numbers on the back of this building. This means that they are most likely found in the nearby neighborhoods as well, but I haven't been creeping around these people's yards with a flashlight at night yet, so I don't know if they've spread to the nearby neighborhoods. I would suspect that they definitely probably have, and that these people have not noticed a difference between the keeled gecko and the more common Mediterranean house gecko. I've noticed no sexual dimorphism. This is another specimen caught at the same location. As you can kind of see the feet there, and you can see a distinct lack of toe pads on the animal. It seems to climb just as well as the Mediterranean house gecko, despite that. Apologize for the relatively poor photos. I was photographing these at night with just a standard point and shoot camera. So not a widespread lizard in the county, but definitely found here. The next lizard we're going to talk about is the Mediterranean house gecko, Hemidactylus turcicus. One of its other common names, as represented there in the Latin, is the Turkish gecko. They are originally from the Mediterranean region and have been introduced to many other parts of the world, including Galveston County. I mentioned in the opening slide that these guys have been here for quite a long time. The earliest incidents I know of is in the early to mid 80s. So when my father actually brought one home from work. They are just like the keeled geckos. They are nocturnal insectivores. You can sometimes find them gathered around lighting on buildings. It's not necessary that you find them on a house or building. You can actually find them out in the middle of the Trans-Pecos region in Texas on rock formations at night. But you do generally find them at least more easily in an urban environment. But I can find them on the Coastal Heritage Preserve, in vegetation, usually by flipping debris. Sometimes you find these guys out there. I will note though that the urban population of them versus the rural populations generally have a little bit of a different color scheme. The rural population of these seems to be darker in coloration. Just a personal observation. They sleep in these hidden places and crevices for most of the day, come out at night to eat insects. Their peak activity is actually around 2 a.m. They're not very big, less than 6 inches in most cases. One that was 6 inches or above would be a real monster. We don't really know what kind of impact these guys are having on native wildlife in our region or our country. They kind of fill a niche that there are no other lizards that fill that niche in this area, for one thing. Are they competing with our native insectivorous frogs? Yes, they probably are. But I just don't know how much of an impact they're having. They're a common lizard that I caught as a child. My son catches now. I'm kind of happy to have them around, but I do realize that they do not belong here. I will sometimes actually, catch, euthanize, and freeze these guys as feeders for some of my snakes as well. But in general, I leave these alone and focus on the more populous and invasive brown anole that actually there's direct evidence that it is competing with our green anoles. They really have very few predators because I would imagine that screech owls probably eat them, and some nocturnally prowling snakes probably go after them too. But for the most part, they're so arboreal, so fast, so good at climbing that they're probably going to escape most predation. Anyway, really cool lizards. Even though they're not native, I really do enjoy having these lizards around, as well as the brown anoles to an extent. Here's another photo of one. As you can see, the much larger toe pads than the keeled gecko. Haven't noticed any sexual dimorphism. No visible difference between male and female Mediterranean house geckos. These guys actually do vocalize, and unfortunately, I don't have a recording of the call to play for you. It's a real barking sound, and I just don't have a recording of it on hand. This photo was actually taken at Lafitte's Cove. The other one was taken outside my home here in kind of central Galveston near Moody Gardens. This one was also caught. Okay. I mentioned the darker color scheme. I caught this one on the Coastal Heritage Preserve in the Peak Woods area while flipping some debris. You notice the much darker body on this animal. So, I don't know what else to say about that. Then I don't think there's been real time for them to select. Maybe they slightly change their coloration based on their surroundings, or maybe only the darker specimens have the capacity to really survive out in these areas because they blend in better. Once again, I really don't know. So this is the western slender glass lizard, my favorite lizard that you can find in Galveston County. This thing appears to be a snake to the casual observer who doesn't know anything about legless lizards. This is actually Ophisaurus attenuatus. So this is a subspecies of Ophisaurus attenuatus, the slender glass lizard, being the western slender glass lizard. This photograph was taken on the Coastal Heritage Preserve, and it was the first western slender glass lizard I had ever seen. I've seen many more since then because I've gotten into that habitat out there where they're common. But this was the first one I saw, and this was just about 3 years ago. So these guys are mostly insectivores, but they are known to actually eat small birds' eggs, small ground nesting bird eggs, and baby rodents when they raid their nests. So they're not strict insectivores. I've actually kept some as captives recently, and they would take pinky mice, even frozen thawed pinky mice that weren't alive. So the extent of their diet, I suspect we don't really know. They're not commonly kept as captives, and they will actually take things besides insects, which other lizards generally will not. That is a better close-up photo of the face. So what makes these guys lizards and not snakes is a question that I get a lot about them. And aside from the internal organs, there's some obvious things that make them lizards. One is that they actually have, a functional eyelid and not just an ocular scale like snakes. So this, in other words, this animal blinks its eye. Another thing is it has an external ear. You can't see that well in this photo, but it actually does have an external ear, and all snakes lack external ears. These guys are going to be found in the open prairie. You're not generally going to find them by flipping debris. Trust me, I've tried. This is actually the only one I've found by flipping debris. While working with groups of kids out in the prairie and prairie restoration this year, in the early spring, actually had one of these. One of the kids dug one up that was actually fairly deep underground, and it was really embedded in that soil. So it was acting fossorially, burrowing down deep into the ground in hibernation when I found it, or when the child found it and I went over and caught it. They were screaming that it was a snake, but it was a great opportunity. I was able to educate them about legless lizards. So as I said, this animal's a creature of the open prairie. It quickly flees into that tall grass. They have a very obvious method of movement that's different from a snake. It's more of a thrashing than a slithering is the best way that I can explain it. These guys will almost leap into the air trying to get out of the road when there's a car or bike or a human approaching them and they're in the road sunning. Like I said, probably my favorite species of Galveston County lizard. Really, really neat animals. So this is the common five-line skink. This is an adult male specimen, Plastiodon fasciatus. These guys, like the others, are insectivores. They are kind of a semi-fossorial animal, burrowing in leaf litter most of the time. But on really sunny days, you can see them out sunning themselves on logs. Lafitte's Cove is a really good place to see these animals. The Stevenson Woods is another really good place to see them. Never seen one in the Core Woods. Never seen one here in my yard. So, according to Herps of Texas, previous to 1990, these animals were in the county. I suspect they've always been in the county, at least, always in terms of as far back as we can go reasonably. My friend Jim disagrees with me on that, and I'm not sure who's right. So I'm just going to present the argument for the sake of information. He thinks these animals came at least to Galveston Island via their eggs being in potting soil. Now, I have my doubts about that, and I'll go ahead and tell you why. I don't think the tossing around of the eggs inside bags of soil and trucks of soil and shipments, I don't think the eggs would remain viable at all to hatch. And I think that any few that might actually make it through there and survive, not enough of them would hatch and make it to maturity to have started a population here. But you know what? Stranger things have happened. So I have it on good authority that these animals have always been in Galveston County, that you could always catch them in the wooded areas of Santa Fe, Hitchcock, Lamarck. I've seen them in Lamarck, never seen one in Texas City. So they're around the county in various places. You can find them. Like I said, this is the adult male. It is identifiable by that red head and relatively drab body coloration. This is an adult female. As you can tell, much darker. It's hard to tell in this photo, but there's some dark blue in the females. They get fairly large as well. I've seen some just as large as the males, but typically they're a little bit smaller. But the coloration is, they're sexually dimorphic by coloration. This is a juvenile 5-line skink. You can tell the juveniles by that bright blue tail and that red in the face, and they're actually quite small as well. So other than that, they look much like the females. They're just a little bit more brightly colored and have that red in the face. So this is a very common lizard in the county as well. Probably almost as common as the green anole, but less, a less seen lizard because they are very much fossorial, burrowing under debris and in leaf litter, eating insect larvae, ant larvae, small spiders, different things like that. They're actually quite a tiny lizard, maybe 3 to 4 inches is the average size. The young are actually very tiny, maybe like 2 inches long. So they're actually easy to find if you know how to find them. You can easily find them in your yard and flower beds by looking underneath leaf litter, flipping bricks and boards. Really neat little lizards, sometimes actually known as ground skinks as well. Cincella lateralis is going to be the Latin name for that animal. So this is another, this is a smaller specimen. This one was actually seen in Dickinson. Very common to find underneath the fallen leaves of deciduous trees and of pine needles that have built up on the ground. So you'll notice that that last specimen and this one are kind of heavily lined. This one, not very heavily lined. So my friend Jim Stevenson points out in his book that there's a distinct difference between the Galveston Island little brown skinks and the mainland little brown skinks that he's noticed as far as the striping and the marking along their backs goes. And he is correct to an extent. This one was caught on the mainland, and it does really lack that striping and those markings. Is that because it's an older animal? Maybe it is. Maybe it's not. I think Jim is a wonderful naturalist. His observations are in general correct. So is this an early sign of speciation, of a split, maybe a subspecies emerging for the Galveston Island on the little brown skink? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. That's definitely how it happens though. So anyway, that's the last photo I have to present on the little brown skink. Okay, now this is probably, unless it turns out that there are prairie skinks actually in Galveston County, this is probably going to be your most rare lizard in the county. The 6-lined race runner, Aspidoscelis sexlineata. That was actually newly renamed taxonomically. You can look into that whole taxonomic swap if you wish to yourself. So this photo was taken actually in Waller County, Texas by my friend Caleb Paul, because unfortunately the photo I have of one here on Galveston Island is terrible. These were included in a book I read called Wildlife of Galveston by Jim Stevenson, which tipped me off to the fact that there were any here at all, because I had never seen one in 40 years. And it wasn't very long after that that because I was watching for them, I actually did see one on the Coastal Heritage Reserve and got a really bad photo of it. So I did document them here for myself in Galveston County. I would imagine down in San Luis Pass you could probably run across one. Jim gets them in his yard on really dry years when the grass is bad. And I actually had one in an area largely of dead grass when I saw one too. These guys are very fast. You're really unlikely to get a good photo of one or catch it, although it has happened. So this is a second photo of that same animal that Caleb took in Waller County. You'll often see these animals out sunning. They don't sit still for very long. They are very active animals. They are Aspidoscelis they're actually the whiptail lizards. So they're closely related to all the other whiptails. All very fast-moving lizards, extremely high metabolisms. Very hard to keep as captives. My friend Nathan Raines said he tried to keep some as captive once, but the amount of food that they were going through and the amount of parasite load that they carry was just not really doable to keep them in captivity. I've also got a friend, Rob Denton, that is actually doing some research on whiptail lizards currently. I don't know where that's going. He was in really early stages of that last time we spoke about a year ago in Arizona. Okay, so this last lizard that I'm going to present on, it is, by all accounts, extirpated from Galveston County. The last one that was seen on Galveston Island was, I think, 1998. The last one that was seen on the nearby mainland was somewhere in the San Leon area, I believe in 2001. There's an unconfirmed report that out by the Swallows Meadows subdivision in, like, I want to say 2010 one was seen or caught by, I want to say Dustin Rhodes told me his brother may have seen one there. Which it seems like he would probably be. Dustin is a herpetologist, and it would follow that maybe his brother had a little more exposure to Texas horned lizards than most people do. Since Dustin actually studies Texas horned lizards as part of his herpetological career, so that sighting was probably legit. Nearby here, Matagorda Island area, they have been seen and can be seen to this day. But Galveston Island, Galveston County, there are no known populations left. These guys feed largely on harvester ants. They do eat other insects as well, though, but they eat a lot of harvester ants. They need what is in those harvester ants to survive. So that there's, first of all, there's not a lot of harvester ants left in Galveston County, which is really going to limit where you could find them. Coastal Heritage Reserve has a very good population of red harvester ants. So you know what? As unrealistic as it may be, I hold out hope that I might come across one out there someday and rediscover at least a small population of these lizards on Galveston Island. I don't think I will, but I'm holding out hope, like I said. I did find the 6-line race runner out there, although it's been seen here since, before 1998, or I mean since 1998. And the Texas horned lizard has not been, unfortunately. So this is yours truly with a Texas horned lizard that was caught in Barnhart, Texas. That's out in West Texas, for those of you who don't know. And I was not illegally handling a protected animal. I was actually, I am a sub-permittee on Romy Swanson's scientific collection permit. We were out there doing some science stuff, some collecting salvage off the road for museum specimens, and we came across this living specimen, and we gave Lee the opportunity to photograph us with the animal. Actually, we asked him to photograph us with the animals, I won't lie. Thanks, Lee Hoy, for the photograph. Anyone that does not know Lee Hoy, he is one cool guy, and he's a seriously good photographer. I recommend you look him up. He, I believe, is a rep for Olympus Cameras now, and he runs a guiding service in Big Bend, I believe. Anyway, Lee Hoy's a cool guy. You should check it out. So, I think I said a little bit about this in the opening slide, but when I was 4 years old, my father caught a Texas horned lizard in Texas City, showed it to me. We were in a kind of a small wilderness area near our home, referred to as the hills. And he caught this animal. I was just a little bitty boy, but I remember it really vividly. I remember him telling me that he moved there in 1971. He was able to catch as many as he wanted in a day in 1971, but by 1980, he could never find them anymore. So 1982 would have been when this lizard in question was actually caught. Only one I've ever seen in Galveston County to this day. So thanks, Dad, for maybe that was the spark animal. I don't know. I don't remember very many things very well about when I was 4 years old. But I do remember that Texas horned lizard. Also remember my grandfather, Billy Joe Wheatley, was a naturalist and a birder, and he is largely responsible for my attitudes on conservation, birds, and reptiles today. My father also was a big influence. He did not believe in killing anything that you weren't going to eat. Unfortunately, he actually would occasionally kill venomous snakes, but did not go out of his way to do that, and was very good about pointing out snakes that were not venomous to me when I was a kid, picking them up, catching them, letting me handle them, teaching me about them, at least the limited amount he knew. So, thanks, Dad, for the horned lizard. Thanks for the passion about the snakes that I eventually got through exposure to them through you. My father would also occasionally catch animals, as I mentioned with the Mediterranean house gecko, at the refinery where he worked, and bring them home and allow me to check them out, from Mediterranean house geckos to rat snakes to snapping turtles. My dad was all about letting us check them out. And with that, we have reached the end of the Lizards of Galveston County. For the wrap up, I'll say that the intended episode 6 was going to be The Rails of Galveston County Part 2. For any of you who are awaiting that episode, it is upcoming. There were a few loose ends I wanted to wrap up. I'm possibly going to be interviewing someone for that episode. I'm still waiting for a good time slot to work out on that. He and I are both, fairly busy people. Also have another, what I intended to be a short episode, but actually ended up being fairly long, that is already completely recorded and ready to go. That is just kind of a spring birding update on what I've seen, where I've seen it at, and when I saw it. Probably not an episode that's going to be for everyone. It probably won't be in the normal, numbering scheme. I'll probably release it as like an episode 0. Just because it's not something everyone wants to listen to. It's something that's pretty birder specific. And even most birders probably won't care because they can find their own birds. But to those really young birders, it might benefit them to know where I've seen what and when. So, wrapping things up, thanks for listening, everyone. This has been episode 6 of the Wild Wild West End, the Lizards of Galveston County. I hope everyone has learned at least something about one of these species, or hopefully all of them. But, signing off. Thanks for listening, everyone. You have a nice day.